And lo and behold, we've got a special bonus episode of the 1871 podcast. And the reason for that is we're lucky enough and honoured to have Reading FC legend Phil Parkinson as a guest. Now, of course, the manager of Wrexham, who Reading are playing at the weekend. So, firstly, Phil, thank you and welcome to the 1871 podcast.
Good evening. Thank you.
And
Hi,
we've
Phil.
got Johnny on the call as well. So I'm sure Johnny's got a couple of questions he'd like to ask you, Phil. But just want to start off. How is it going to feel um, managing Wrexham against your old club Reading at the weekend?
Yeah, I think it's always special when you come up against one of your old clubs, but obviously Reading is a club I was at the longest in my career, whether managing or playing. So yeah, a lot of great memories from the times down there. Got a lot of people coming up for the game, as you can imagine. And yeah, looking forward to it. It's going to be an interesting game. I've watched a lot of the Reading's first few fixtures and feel as though we know a lot about them. And they're a good side. They've had a decent start, like ourselves. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really entertaining game.
All right, and just take us back. Obviously, you played for Reading, you had a good playing career, moved into management, had a good management career. Tell us about when that opportunity for Wrexham came about. We heard that Rob McElhenney was pestering you for a while to get you to come on board. What was that like at that time, and was that a difficult decision to make to drop down, or how were you feeling about it at the time?
Yeah, I think obviously I'd been at Sunderland for a short period, and I was having a time out and just assessing really where I felt I wanted to go next. And the call came from Wrexham, and yeah, of course, it's like to drop into the National League at the time it's always a gamble because if you drop into the National League and it's not successful, then the next job could be a tough one. But after speaking to Rob and looking at things closely and just getting to know the people in charge of the club, I realised that this was really an exciting club to be part of going forward. And I think, like everybody, that's seen that Rob and Ryan had two Hollywood actors had bought Wrexham Football Club, and it was almost like, is that for real? But very quickly, when I spoke to them, I realised how serious they are about, or that they were about being successful as owners and the plans to build Wrexham Football Club back up, because obviously the club had some tough times, and in particular 15 years outside the league, and you can imagine that you're a proud football club in a real hotbed of football, a club which represents the whole of North Wales, and you find yourself out the league structure for 15 years. So it's a great story to come on board with, and I'm pleased so far it's been a successful one.
And it's turned into obviously a good move for you. You had that, incredible season when you were up against Notts County. You both went up. You've come up into League One now. All of a sudden, you're playing against Reading, your former club, the likes of Birmingham City, etc. What does the future look like? How big are those ambitions, or are you just kind of trying to keep a level head about it all?
I think every season you go into, whether as a player or as a manager, you've got to aim to be at the top, and you've got to try and build a squad. You've got to be ambitious, but also respectful of the division we're going into. Like you've just said, there's a lot of clubs in this league who've been ex-Premier League clubs and have got a long way ahead of us in terms of structure, in terms of academy, in terms of squad building over a number of years. So we've been trying to fast track our way up the leagues, and we come into this division pleased where we are with the squad at the moment. There's another week to go in the window. And we're just kind of feeling our way in, assessing the squad on a game-to-game basis. And first of all, the first two games have both been real challenges. The Wickham game, was should have been more comfortable than it ended. The scoreline suggested at the end, but we got the win. Bolton was a real kind of feisty 0-0 draw, a great test for us against the team who's in the playoffs last year. And obviously we come up against Reading, who even though with the financial, difficulties at the moment, still possess a very good squad.
And Johnny, want to bring you in now. I'm sure there's a couple of questions you want to ask to Phil.
Yes, sorry, I'm out to see this. Apologies for the noise. It's short notice, but Phil, you played under some great managers at Reading and in your career. Who was the biggest influence for you? What have you learned? Like, 'cause I know you've been through a few different clubs, and now you're at Wrexham. What's kind of? Do you have a ethos? Is that the word, or like what have you learned? Because you've played under you know Reading managers, and you've done different things, and now you're at Wrexham, and all of a sudden there's a big spotlight on you. How does that feel as well, pressure wise?
Yeah, I think dealing with pressure is a key element of being a manager, and you've got to have good people working with you. I think that's absolutely key for any manager. Don't underestimate that. Have a really strong staff with you, and I think that's what I've been managed to build at clubs, and certainly now at Wrexham. Yeah, and like you rightly say, played under some really good managers. Mark McGee was the manager who signed me at Reading. Learned a lot from him and Colin Lee. I always look back at that time and think that team was a very special side. The team just got promotion, and Mark, was very good management of the squad. Obviously, Colin was a great number two to him
Yeah,
as well. So I learnt a lot from those two, and subsequently other managers I played under. Obviously, Pards was a young manager, first job in football, and yeah, also with Alan, he's gone on to have a great career. So I think in terms of management style, as everyone says, you do take a bit from everybody. I think as a manager, you've got to be adaptable in terms of the way you play the game. I think these managers who kind of get jobs and get the job where they're selling themselves with this incredible footballing philosophy, and then they go into the club and realize the players aren't ready to play a certain way, but they still try and implement a certain style of play, can come unstuck very quickly. So you've got to assess, because often you take over a job in the middle of a season, or after a club's had a bad start. So you've got to assess what you've got, and you've got to mold your way of playing around the existing squad. And I think that's really key. And I think during the season as well that, I always look at the top managers like Ancelotti, Mourinho when he was at Chelsea, obviously Sir Alex. The top managers adapt from game to game, and it may not
yeah.
be a complete change in shape, but it may be just some little adaptations in the selection or the style of play to go and get victories. Because over the season, you've got to win all different types of football games. Some uh, teams will come to Wrexham and sit off the ball, and we've got to be patient with it. Others will play a high pressing game against us, and you've got to adapt within a game and from game to game. So that adaptability, I think, is key, and not being so set. Oh, this is the way I play. I've got this job through an interview of telling everyone I'm going to make this team play like Barcelona or Man City now, and then you go, oh, actually, I need to adapt. So I think that's the key for any young manager going into football.
And like we've seen managers. We talked about it earlier about Blackpool have sacked their manager after two games. Other clubs are sacking manager after one. Like the pressure on you as a manager, like as a player, different. But like, luckily, obviously, I hope you've got the backing. Obviously, you have for your guys. But like that must be insane. Like what you have to build a club, don't you? You have to build, top to bottom, as you know, with Reading over all the years that you were there. And it seems like you're doing the same thing again.
Yeah, sorry, I just lost you that.
Sorry, noise in the background. I was just saying, like with Reading, the club was built over a period of time, and you seem to be doing that with Wrexham now as well, with owners that get that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at Reading, that I remember going to Colchester in my first managerial job, and at the time people looked at Reading and they held it in a very high esteem in the football world, because what Sir John Medeski had done with the board of directors. They built a club with a very strong platform, and they hadn't overspent. Equally, they always backed the manager. But if you look, training ground, academy implemented, new stadium, nice structure about the club, and ultimately doing it that way, a sustainable way, ended up with a club playing in the Premier League for the first time. So people looked at Reading, how to do it. Listen, if you just throw millions at it, and it's very, very difficult. You've got to have a structure. You've got to have a strong platform to build a football club from. So, Rob and Ryan kind of completely get that. As much as I said earlier that, when I took over, the squad had been neglected for so many years. We had to fast track it. And we signed a few older players who were good for the here and now. And I think that was important for us to help guide the younger ones we've got in the squad. But yeah, exactly. I think Reading, Burnley, clubs like that, Luton Town now, are clubs everyone can look at and say, it's not about spending the most money. It's about having a structure, having good people to make key decisions. And I think that's, in every football club, it's like the transfer window now that every decision you make is a very, very tight call. And it's make sure that you've got the right people in that decision-making process. And yeah, it's always interesting to look at other clubs from afar, but Reading at that particular time was a club held in very high esteem.
And Phil, when I mentioned the word legend, I saw you had a little bit of a smile on your face there. I remember you as a player. You were the engine, the heart, and I've described you. We were talking about you earlier. Described you as the heart and soul of that team, and someone who inspired other people. Talk to us a little bit about what that time was like, not only in your football career at Reading, but also in your life and in your own personal development.
Yeah, I mean, I was 24 when I came to Reading, and yeah, I mean, I think in the football team, it's about playing your role within the team structure. And, I knew what I was good at as a player. And I think certainly in my early years, I developed on that and under the managers. But building the team is like piecing a jigsaw together and getting the balance right. And if you go back to that team, there was a lovely balance, in the side. I was more physical in midfield. You had Kevin Dillon in there, who's a very, got craft and real creativity. Mickey Goodin, who would just run all day, but was underrated as a player as well. Jimmy up top, who's a fantastic goal scorer. Stuart Lovell next to him, who complemented him. So, Gilksy is out and out wide player on one side. Scotty Taylor or Mickey would tuck in on the right. So, and I better give Dylan Kerr a mention, or my phone will be beeping all the time. But so if you look at that team, it was a well thought out side, which didn't just happen. That was a team which was put together by the management with a nice balance to it. But the big thing about the side was, and it's what I've tried to create wherever I've been, had a lot of character in the side, a lot of character. Jeff, Macca, Adi Williams, the lads we just mentioned, Geordie, Dylan, lads who would give everything. And for people think football changes, and of course systems change, and pitches are better, sports science implemented, but you still need a strong mentality to get promotion. You still need players who are going to go away to Oldham on a Tuesday night, and you look around the dressing room and say, yeah, we can rely on all this group today, because you can't carry people in football. Football is a very competitive industry. And if you go into a football game and you've got 2 or 3 players who aren't quite at it, you'll get beat. It's as simple as that. And, I always looked at those teams. We had the successful times at Reading. It was a group of good lads who would give their all, but with a good balance in the team as well.
And Phil, just want to ask you about, bringing it right up to date with Reading. Obviously, you left the club. Reading went up to the Premier League and then went back up again. And obviously, we've had a turbulent few years, to say the least. And now it does feel as if that chapter in Reading's history is about to come to a close with a new owner. What have you made of what's been happening at Reading, and what do you think needs to happen next?
Well, first of all, I've been involved in several clubs who've been in the middle of takeovers, and it's very stressful for the manager and the supporters and the players. And the manager has done a great job there, holding it together. And so many times at Charlton and at Bolton, the takeover's happening this week. It's going to happen, and it never does. Another deadline passes, and it just there's always seems to be complications. But I think fundamentally that Reading's got a lot of potential in terms of like I said, the stadium, the training facilities. So there obviously is people who are desperate to buy the club, but obviously the gentleman selling it is going to want the deal to be right. And I haven't really looked at the detail, but it's never straightforward. But I think ultimately it will get done. And what from afar it looks like that Reading over years have been able to produce some good young players still. And it was a bit like when I was at Charlton. I always remember Richard Murray, the owner, was basically holding the club together at the time. There was takeover talk everywhere. He needed to sell the club, but he kept the quality level and the status of the academy all through that. And so there was always that chain of players coming through. And I think it was a very wise move because you see in those circumstances sometimes, right, cost-cutting exercise, we'll close the academy down while and all of a sudden those players you've developed go elsewhere. So I think Charlton have done that, and it seems to me Reading have done that. So whilst there has been tough times, they've maintained a core of good young players, and that stands them in good stead for the future.
Phil, I've got one more question, and then I'll leave the last question to Johnny because we appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a legend.
We'd love to keep you for ages and spoil your plans for the weekend. But we won't do that. So my final question really is, looking at League One now, is only 2 games in. It's difficult to call. What do you think? The realistic ambitions for the club for Wrexham this season, and same about Reading. Really, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts about what Reading might be able to do?
This is going to sound like I'm sitting on the fence, but honestly, I think after 10 games, you get a much better picture. At the moment, there's teams who probably not had the best starts, but I still think squad-wise look strong. There's other teams who've started well. So it's difficult to predict, but all I'll say is that there is a lot of clubs this year who will be thinking they can definitely get the top 6, maybe the top 2. And my experience of being in this league is that there's always a surprise package as well. And you really can't write anybody off because while some of the bigger clubs like the Boltons and Birminghams are spending the millions, there's a club somewhere who's been chipping away, piecing together a good mentality in the group, a good squad depth. Hopefully that is us and may overachieve. So yeah, it's difficult to say. I think Reading, from what I've seen, obviously the great result at Birmingham, it looks like a comfortable victory against Wigan. So they'll be delighted with their start. We're pleased with ours, but equally for us, we know there's a lot of work to be done with us. We're not the finished article by any stretch of the imagination, but we're enjoying progressing as a group, and we'll see where it takes us.
And Johnny, final question for you.
Yeah, so sorry, Phil. I'm over in Ireland here at a gig, and it's raining, so I'm keep dodging the rain. So apologies for I'm not being rude, Phil. But one of my big things is about mental health and in the game, like when you started out and you came through as a player and now as a manager, how big is it for you as a manager to look after your players, but no, and your own? Like now you're sort of a Hollywood superstar. Like the pressure, does that ramp up from where you were? National League. Now you've gone up, you've gone 2 promotions for your players, for yourself. When back in the 90s, we had Dylan on and talking about his mental health, which is it's really eye-opening for a non-playing person. How does it evolve for yourself?
I think you've got to watch out for everybody, haven't you? Whether it's your family or it's your people you work with, because there's a lot of challenges out there for players under the spotlight, contract situations, mortgages, young families, etc. So I think never ever underestimate that people need to have time, sit down, speak to people, find out everything's okay in their family life. And for those who've watched our documentary, that you'll realise over the course of seasons there's been so many personal issues along the way, and I think you've got to be completely aligned to that as a manager because you've got to make sure that these lads are going on the pitch and playing in front of 12,000 people every week and are right mentally or right as they can be with the situation. So yeah, I think Rob and Ryan, myself, and all the staff are always there for the lads, and I think that's really important because in our day you can say, yeah, was it everyone a bit tougher, and maybe that the manager spoke to players a bit harsher. But do you know what? I still feel people needed a chat with too,
Yeah.
and support from the teammates. So it hasn't changed as much as people think.
The
Um,
night's like the utopia, according to Dylan.
Exactly. Well, sometimes that's a good point because, in that era, the lads were going out socializing a lot, and after a few beers, people used to open up to each other and say, and that is the honest truth. We used to say, look, sometimes, when we went out as a group, which we did, quite regularly because that was a kind of more of a culture in those days, but
Yeah.
it did serve its purpose because after a few drinks, everybody starts opening up a little bit. So it definitely served its purpose in those days. So yeah, it's different in that way. So yeah, you've just got to keep check of everybody and make sure everyone's okay as much as you can because every player wants to be in the team, and
Yeah.
social media, I think, can be so damaging if players are on that because supporters who are on the phones putting things on social media don't realise how damaging it can be to individuals. And I've had a lot of cases of that as a manager dealing with players who have been criticised heavily and had to manage that behind the scenes because the best way to deal with social media is to stay off it. I really do stay off it, and some managers say they do, but they don't. But people will tell me if there's something I really need to know, which is out there, but I stay off it. But yeah, managing that with the players is key. But I think that social media aspect is not just footballers; it's society
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
whole.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Yeah, Phil, I'll just finish off with one very last
Yeah,
question.
no problem.
Sneak it in if that's all right.
Yeah.
So, you're in the spotlight now. Hollywood owners, obviously the documentary. Have you got that balance of, just trying to get on and do your job? How much are you aware of the bigger picture, all the extra fans you've got around the world, and how much can you enjoy this at the moment?
Yeah, I've enjoyed this immensely. I think that the first part of the question is an interesting one because our mantra, myself and Steve Parkinson, since we've come into the club, is to the squad. Listen, we've enjoyed the kind of the spotlight, and I think we've got to embrace that. But we've got to remain humble at all times, and always remember when you pull on a Wrexham shirt, you're representing a working class town, and I think that's really key. Because people in Wrexham spend a lot of money to come and watch us home and away, and I'm very, very aware of that, and I want the performances to represent that each week. And I think most of the time we've got that right. Of course, there's going to be times you fall short for whatever reason, but in the majority of the time here, I think the players have represented the town in the right way, and that's why there's been a great connection between the supporters and the squad.
All right. Well, Phil, thanks ever so much for your time. We really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on, and won't wish you good luck for Saturday, but perhaps good luck for the rest of the season.
Thanks, gents. Enjoyed the
Thanks,
chat.
Phil. Take care.
Cheers, gentlemen.
Really
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it, mate. Bye
Take it
bye.
easy. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks.